Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about the economy and we're going to be trying to explain this. On the currency exchange at the moment, you can see that the Exalted Orb to Divine Orb ratio is something of the order 240 to 1. Now, when I recorded a draft of this video that I ended up scrapping last night, it was 209 to 1. When I recorded an earlier version of this video just a couple of days ago that I again scrapped, it was 180 to 1. There has been a really substantial explosion in the value of Divine Orbs when measured against the Exalted Orb. Now, the most logical seeming explanation for this is one that I actually think is wrong, and that is people that think that the Divine Orb has shot up in value. Because if we have a look at some of the other currencies that people are interested in using in Path of Exile 2, let's go with the Chaos Orb as an example. What you will see is that the Chaos Orb to Divine Orb ratio is pretty close to where it's been over the last week. I've been paying attention to this one. It's stayed about 48 to 1. Now, at the time I'm recording this, it's 50.5, which is actually an increase, but it's only an increase of 5%, and it has been going up and down very close to that for a while. Likewise, if we take a look at commodities, from ridiculously small value ones like the Scroll of Wisdom, all the way up to expensive things like an Audience with the King, what you'll still notice is that the Divine Orb buys about the same amount of most of these commodities that it did just a few days ago. What's happened though is that the Exalted Orb is buying less. Okay, so what's the reason for this? The direction I think we're going in Path of Exile 2 is away from the Exalted Orb being a widely used currency. I think we're going to see a situation much like Path of Exile 1, where the standard trading currencies that players use are Divine Orbs for medium and large trades, Chaos Orbs for small trades, and Mirrors of Kalandra for truly massive trades. That's the way it's been in POE 1 ever since patch 3.19, and I expect it will become the case in Path of Exile 2. So what was it that happened that started this trend towards Exalted Orbs calamitously dropping in value and the Divine Orb soaring in value relative to the Exalt? I think it's because of patch 0.1.1. 0.1.1 massively increased the number of monsters that are present in a fair number of maps. And what this means is that applying an Exalted Orb to a Waystone now provides more returns. Now, the first thought you're going to have with that is that this just means more people are applying Exalted Orbs to their Waystones. Surely this is going to increase demand for them, but not really have any impact on supply, and as a result, you would expect the Exalted Orb to go up in value, and so maybe you'd be seeing a 60 to 1 ratio where it was 120 to 1 a while ago. But the thing is that once you start applying Exalted Orbs to your Waystones, you start dropping more Exalted Orbs in every map that you run than the number of Exalted Orbs you invested into it. You can only invest 2 or 3 Exalted Orbs into a Waystone in most normal circumstances in Path of Exile 2. So it'll be 3 if the Waystone dropped as a magic item, and then you regaled it and triple exalted it, and it will be 2 if it dropped as a normal item or as a rare item, and then you identified or elked it, and then you applied your Exalted Orbs on that. Either way, you end up hitting the 6 mod limit, and then you can optionally Varl it or not Varl it. That's up to you, and I would usually recommend Varling your Waystones, but whatever you decide there, that's the end of the line. But when you go and run those maps, you start finding that because of the buffs that happened in 0.1.1, instead of getting 1, 2, or occasionally 3 raw Exalted Orbs dropping in the map, you start finding it's much more common to get 3, 4, or 5 because of all the extra monsters that were added. As long as people keep picking up all of these Exalted Orbs, we end up with this situation where the oversupply across the entire League economy builds up, and we end up with Exalted Orbs ceasing to be a currency that anyone really wants more of. Just like, for instance, you probably use a bunch of Orbs of Augmentation in Path of Exile 2, but outside Act 1, you're not interested in trading for them, because you get all the augmentations you could want, and more, just from killing monsters while you're playing the game. What we're seeing here is a situation where supply of Exalted Orbs, in fact, supply of pretty much all currencies went up with patch 0.1.1, but the demand for Exalted Orbs hasn't been able to expand. Once you reach the gear level that you can't apply Exalted Orbs to your equipped items, it's only really a case of you pick an item up off the ground, you put an Exalted Orb on it if it looks like it's got potential, but quite often the item doesn't have potential, and so you don't even get to that point. Contrast this, however, to the Chaos Orb. The Chaos Orb is something that has continued utility later in the game because you pick up an item and you're like, this has a couple of good mods on it, but it's not a cohesive whole. If I apply a Chaos Orb, it's probably not going to get better, but it has a chance of doing so. And for that reason, people who are identifying items off the ground, they've got a lot of demand for Chaos Orbs, because very often you'll find this item isn't good yet, but it could be salvaged through a lucky Chaos Orb. That's the reason that I think Chaos Orb demand will stay higher as we start getting more and more loot from every single map that we do, because of the 0.1.1 buffs that took place. One thing I did in researching this video was experimented a little bit with whether or not it's worthwhile recommending to new players, just a way of building themselves a little initial currency base. Is it worth their while flipping Scrolls of Wisdom against Exalted Orbs? You can see that there's a couple of transactions here set up for exactly that reason on my currency exchange. The answer here was that it's not, but it was also interesting to just watch how the Scroll of Wisdom has fluctuated against the Exalted Orb as well. The Scroll of Wisdom is something that players who are solidly at endgame, you have all of the ones that you want from the campaign. If you ever want them, you can buy them for 25 gold. It's really not something you're going to trade for very often. Even then, there is still a lot of turnover of this commodity. And as it turns out, you can make a small amount of currency doing this, but it's not really worth the gold. There's other things that are far better. For example, buying and selling greater essences against the Chaos Orb seems to be something fairly lucrative at the moment, and a better use of your gold overall. But while doing that, it was really interesting to watch just how the Scroll of Wisdom had been falling to almost zero against the Exalt recently, and now it's just had this resurgence. Now, there has been one other thing that's taken place in the last week, and this deals with the very top end of the market when it comes to the Trade League. This is the Divine Orb to Mirror of Kalandra ratio. There was a real shock that took place in this market about 7 days ago, where the Mirror of Kalandra fell from about 500 Divine Orbs very quickly down to about 200. Now, I did some investigation into that. There was a video that was posted to Chinese website Bilibili that claimed to be evidence of Mirrors of Kalandra being duplicated. There was no video footage of any duplication exploit that was taking place there, and the footage that the video showed of a stash tab that was full of Mirrors of Kalandra was dubious. It may have been real, it may not have been real. All that said, enough people believed it that there was a panic sell-off of Mirrors of Kalandra. However, there has since been a resurgence in the value of the Mirror of Kalandra since that took place. I do not know whether there was an actual item duplication exploit there or whether that was entirely done as a market manipulation hoax. There have been plenty of examples in Path of Exile 1 where players have gone and orchestrated a market manipulation hoax, alleging that duplication exists or fabricating drop rates of various items in order to push the market in certain ways. It wouldn't surprise me either way. The key thing though was that this change did not affect the fundamentals. Mirrors, at least in Path of Exile 1, they're 1,000 times rarer than Divines. In Path of Exile 2, it's at least plausible that they remain 1,000 times rarer than Divines. And generally speaking, when they're less than about 600-700 Divines, you typically find a scenario where the Mirror of Kalandra just keeps building value until it gets to about that point. The difference when it comes to the Divine to Exalt ratio is that I think here this is a permanent shift because people have just lost confidence in the Exalted Orb as being something that the player base as a whole will have demand for. The reason that Divine Orbs are a higher value stable currency, partly it's because they're rare, but they're not as rare as the Orb of Annulment. The key thing about the Divine Orb is that there is incredible player demand for more of them, and this is caused by the fact that a number of endgame uniques that are quite rare and hard to get your hands on, are much rarer in fact than the Divine Orb. Things like the Belt Ingenuity, these are far better when they're well rolled, and as a result, they become somewhat of a sink of Divine Orbs. People chasing after a perfect roll Ingenuity, or even just a good roll Ingenuity, they will keep trading for more and more Divine Orbs, keep removing those Divine Orbs from the league economy. That fact that there is a proper sink for Divine Orbs, and that there is not a proper sink for Exalted Orbs, is the reason that I think this is a fundamental shift, rather than something temporary like the Mirror of Kalandra thing that was either caused by a short-lived duplication exploit or caused by a hoax, where someone wanted you to believe that there was a short-lived duplication exploit so that they could buy up a whole bunch of mirrors off the Trade League market. One last thing that doesn't deserve its own video, but that absolutely cracked me up. Path of Exile community can be fantastic sometimes. There is a crossover that someone's done. There's only a proof of concept where they've taken some of the sound files from the Dungeon Crawler Carl audiobooks and made an item filter based on them. This is the sort of thing that will only make sense if you're a fan of those books, but I absolutely laughed when I saw this, so I'll put a link to that down in the description below. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. May your Val Orbs have interesting results.